Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. I finally am home, and I'm finally mostly rid of that whatever the hell I caught week before last or last week. Anyway, today's situation report, I'm going to focus on one area of the world in particular, which is one that has come up in my normal reports, and I haven't really dug into it, and I finally started digging in. So right now, the Sudan, South Sudan, and the Congo are having a lot of governmental issues. And what I mean by that is literal civil war, insurrection type stuff. And not January 6th insurrection. That was a riot of dumbasses. A real insurrection would be in the streets all over the country. This is that kind of insurrection / civil war. I really don't know how they're categorizing it now. So I'm wondering why all this turmoil here. I'm getting to the point where I really believe that when you see governments collapse in that manner in these smaller countries, especially in countries that may have resources, it's usually because bigger players are messing with them. So the Sudan, specifically Khartoum, used to be a very friendly American country, or pro-Western, pro-French, if you will. Before their civil war broke out, their new leader actually was making a deal with the Russians to give them access to a Navy-worthy seaport that they have on the Mediterranean. And all of a sudden, the commander of their militia, which is like their National Guard, suddenly gets an influx of money and equipment and training and breaks into a civil war against the first guy. So that immediately, once you start digging, you start to see why that flag. And I'm wondering why the Congo. Well, the Congo is known for its resources, diamonds, gold, and rare earth elements, lithium, boron, other stuff like that. Traditionally, the French and or the Belgians have had control of those regions back in the colonial days, in which were lost during the separation of those countries from their colonial powers. And I'm now reading that Russia, China, and the US are all very interested in those minerals. Now let's think about this. If the US is waging a trade war with China, and one of the tokens, one of the playing pieces is rare earth minerals, then that makes 100% sense. All right, and we're going to see more of that. Now, a lot of people will argue the Gulf War was started because of oil and gas. I could not argue that. I believe that had a lot, if not everything, to do with what was going on at the time. Whether Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, they found some. Whether it was a play to keep them out of going to the gold standard and not the petrodollar, I don't know. But I do have no doubt in my mind, when large companies get RFP'd, they get awarded large contracts in a country that's in the middle of a war that we instigated after a terror attack. And they're all American and French and British companies. It makes you wonder, okay, what did we get into this war for? Without a doubt, I think it was for resources and money. But there were no rare earth minerals. That was oil and gas there. And here we are now looking at the Congo, which we're not involved in to my knowledge, but they're having really major issues in Congo and Sudan. And this has to do with access to docks and shipyards and rare earth metals. And I think we're going to see a transition away from the oil and gas, although that's always going to be there, and toward the rare earth metals. So now I'm starting to wonder if other countries that have these resources might start suddenly experiencing government issues, collapses, civil wars because of it. And how are we going to get pulled into this kind of stuff? So this is something to look for going forward, is those rare earth metals, not necessarily for EVs, but for electronics, right? The lithiums, the titaniums, the borons, all these minerals that are very hard to get here in the States. You start wondering if we're going to see a transition to that. There's even speculation that the North Carolina flooding, the response was poor on purpose, because it was in the interest to devalue all those properties so that corporations could take over to mine in Appalachia for some of these same metals. So start paying attention to that kind of stuff, because if you live over these minerals, could it be, and how does it apply to preparedness? Well, if you're someone who lived in Appalachia, especially in Western North Carolina, you've experienced it. But if you live in an area that has these earth elements, is it possible that something could occur to devalue your property so that you could get bought out, or eminent domain could be applied? I'm going to be watching this kind of stuff really closely in the future. Oh, and I have another tidbit for you for my situation report. Afghanistan again. Apparently when Trump came back into power, right, he had a deal with the Taliban. They were not to attack us. We were supposed to do a staged withdrawal. Leaving Bagram was not in the cards. When Biden took office, they basically bailed. Well, apparently, the Taliban has been under a lot of pressure from ISIS-K and a few other insurgent groups. And so they reached out to the president and said, hey, how about we make a deal, because China's impinging on India and Pakistan and everyone else. How would you like Bagram back if you help train our guys so we can run off ISIS? So it makes you wonder, did we fund ISIS to destabilize the Taliban to get Bagram back? And or is this genuinely the Taliban realizing they bit off more than they can chew? Either way, it's very interesting. But here's the kicker. Getting Bagram back, which is a high quality airport, it is I guess it would be, in the States, it would be a Class B airport, like a major airport, capable of heavy aircraft, puts us within 3 hours of the Chinese province that houses and manufactures a lot of their ballistic missiles. And Pakistan will let us fly over all day long because they're not fans of the Chinese either. So let's think about that for a second. Are we positioning airfields with the intent of being able to go hit China more so than Russia? Think of Taiwan. Think of Diego Garcia. England just turned Diego Garcia over back to the Maldives, but part of the deal was America gets a 100-year lease to Diego Garcia. We keep the airfields. All of those airfields were relevant to hitting Iran and hitting China. So I'm wondering what's at play here. I'm wondering if China and the US and the UK have our hands in the Congo thing. And I damn well know, without a doubt, I can't prove it, that we had something to do with that civil war in Sudan, because we didn't want Putin to have a Navy base in the Med right across from Italy. So things to watch for. Watch for those rare earth metal countries. And whenever you see a new country either getting in a war, having a civil war, or the government starts collapsing, start digging. And if you live in an area that has this kind of stuff, pay attention to what's going on around you. It doesn't take much for state or federal government to eminent domain you and take your land. So anyway, that's it for this one. I'm leaving you some Easter eggs to think about. You guys be good. God bless. Godspeed. And I will see you on my next video.